Hello and welcome to the Petersfield Bookshop Recommends. This is our series of short videos in which we take a look at a particular genre or type of writing, or perhaps a subject or even a single author, and provide some recommendations. We think you're all pretty smart cookies out there and able to find the big names and the bestsellers for yourselves, so we will try and send you down some less well-trodden byways in the company of writers not so well known. This video takes a look at vintage science fiction, and so unlike other videos in this series, some of these books are no longer in print. The books pictured and the ISBN numbers given are for editions of the book that we think you should be able to find reasonably easily, but do bear in mind other editions exist if you set out to find them. So our first book is The Eye in the Sky by Philip K. Dick. When we recommend a work by a very well-known author, as PKD certainly is, we like to choose one that is a little off their beaten path. PKD published this in the 1950s, and most of his well-known titles come from later in his career, and these 1950s novels can be somewhat overlooked. Eye in the Sky begins in a strange laboratory in which there is an accident and 8 people in the lab are propelled into or through various different strange realities throughout the rest of the novel. They include a dimension ruled by strident fundamentalist Christians and another in which Marxism has full reign. You can see that Senator McCarthy had only just died in 1957 when this book was published. The usual mind-bending that you'd expect from a PKD novel is right here throughout as he explores subjective realities and the nature of consciousness, and the twist is both brilliantly executed and also quietly ambiguous, leaving the reader unsettled at the end of the book. Classic PKD, but often overlooked in favour of his more well-known novels. There was always going to be a novel on this list by Samuel R. Delany, a personal hero of mine. I toyed with the idea of recommending his 900-page masterpiece Dahlgren, but decided to break you in gently with one of his cleverest and most thought-provoking books, the 1966 novel Babel 17. In the middle of an interstellar war, a new code is picked up, being blasted into space, and after each burst, the enemy attacks. Starship Captain Rydra Wong, a linguist and renowned poet, is called into service to try and understand the code. But she soon realizes it is a language, not a code, and as she starts to learn the language, strange things begin to happen. Suddenly she is able to predict the locations of the next attacks, and time begins to slow down for her. The novel is absolutely concerned with how language shapes the way we perceive things, which is one of Delany's central concerns throughout his entire oeuvre, but it's also a very human tale of love and betrayal. Classic Delany, whip-smart, whistle-clean prose with both intellectual and emotional heft, and in fact the hint of a kind of cyberpunk atmosphere ahead of its time. Delany was indeed ahead of his time in '66, and this novel still feels bang up to date now. From 1930, Last and First Men by Olive Stapledon is the most vintage of all our vintage sci-fi picks. It's also by far the most ambitious in scale. The book tells the story of 2 billion years of human history, which is divided into 18 different species of human, ours being only the first in that line. If you like your sci-fi predictive, you should know that starting as it does in the 21st century, this novel heralds a series of devastating wars in Europe and eventually leaves US and China as the 2 world superpowers facing off against each other. The narrator of the novel is being addressed rather in the manner of channeling by the last species of humans who know that their end is coming. It is a haunting book with lots of flaws, but with such scale and ambition and force of message, one forgives the foibles of the 1930s that might have found their way into it in places. And after all, how often do you get to read a book which covers 2 billion years of history? Published not long after Wyndham's Day of the Triffids, The Death of Grass by John Christopher came out in 1956. It has a very similar feel to Triffids and a similar theme, but some would say it was accomplished rather better. A new virus has swept through East Asia, but this is not a human virus. This affects rice plants, and there's a massive famine. At first, the Western world seems unaffected, but the virus eventually mutates and starts to kill off barley and wheat, and in fact, as the title suggests, all the grasses. There are wrong-headed governmental attempts to close borders and bungled attempts to deal with the virus, but the upshot is that we are in a post-apocalyptic England, watching as anarchy spreads as food sources dry up. The novel follows two men and their families trying to make their way across England to join with the brother of one of the men who is living in a relatively unaffected and well-defended valley. The book presents some pretty stark moral choices, and the main characters are not always sympathetic in those choices and the ones that they make, but the reader is constantly confronted with the question, what would I do in a situation like this? It is a dark novel about a dark time, a real classic well overdue for re-evaluation and a group of new and appreciative readers. Before you fire off a fierce email of complaint that I'm including a 1987 book in a selection of vintage science fiction novels, you should probably consider that 1987 is now 36 years ago. Pantera by Judith Moffat is an extraordinary piece of work. A group of Quaker colonists land on a world they call Pantera and discover it is already inhabited by a group of creatures that they come to know as the Hrossa. Relations are established, and the Hrossa are happy to tolerate the humans on a number of strict conditions, most of which are about non-expansion. The humans agree to these, realizing they have inadvertently landed on what is, in effect, someone else's planet. However, a second group of colonists, non-Quakers, are not so keen on staying put where they landed, and conflict ensues. What makes this novel stand out is its creation of the Hrossa as creatures who are genuinely alien. Their language, politics, socialization, sexuality, religion and ritual, all of these things are studied and explored by the Quaker colonists, and we are constantly shuttling back and forth between difference and sameness, between communication and misunderstanding. It's an ecological novel, and it has real heart, and it is not as well known as it should be. Thank you for joining us on this romp through a few vintage science fiction books. Please do check out our website and also the rest of this YouTube channel. There are other recommendation videos as well as other bits and pieces from the life of the Petersfield Bookshop. We'll see you again in another video.